For thousands of years, the ancient sages warned that poverty often begins long before an empty wallet, and abundance often begins long before money arrives. The richest life begins when your character becomes greater than your cravings. The greatest fortunes, they believed, are first created in the invisible world of thought, character, discipline, and stewardship. A person could work tirelessly, labor from sunrise to sunset, and yet remain trapped in lack, unable to hold on to wealth no matter how hard they tried. Wealth is not created by effort alone. Effort matters. Discipline matters. Skill matters. But history is filled with people who worked endlessly and still struggled, while others seem to attract opportunity, support, and prosperity almost effortlessly. Why? The ancients believed that prosperity follows laws just as real as gravity, laws governing consciousness, emotion, attention, and energy. Because when your inner world changes, your financial reality often begins to change with it. In this journey, you'll discover why fear silently repels opportunity, why gratitude sharpens perception, why disciplined stewardship multiplies resources, and why some people unknowingly sabotage prosperity even while desperately pursuing it. By the end, you'll understand the forgotten principle that ancient initiates believed separates temporary wealth from lasting abundance. Chapter 1. Stewardship. The forgotten secret of multiplication. Long before banks measured wealth in numbers and markets determined value by fluctuating prices, an old teacher walked through a fertile valley with 3 young apprentices. Each of them carried a small pouch of grain given to them at sunrise. The teacher said nothing about planting it, selling it, or eating it. He simply instructed them, "Return in 1 year with whatever your wisdom has made of this gift." The first apprentice, afraid of losing even a single grain, buried the pouch beneath a stone. Every few weeks he uncovered it to make sure it was still there. When the year ended, he proudly returned every grain exactly as he had received it. The second apprentice enjoyed the grain immediately. He ground it into flour, baked bread, and celebrated its taste. By the following season, nothing remained except the memory of a pleasant meal. The third apprentice carefully prepared a small field. He planted each grain with patience, watered the soil faithfully, removed weeds each morning, and protected the young shoots through storms. At harvest, he returned not with 1 pouch, but with many baskets overflowing with grain. The old teacher smiled. "The gift was never the grain," he said quietly. "The gift was the opportunity to become its steward." This forgotten lesson echoes through nearly every ancient wisdom tradition. Before abundance comes stewardship. Before multiplication comes responsibility. Before increase comes faithful care for what is already in your hands. Many people believe wealth begins when they receive more. The ancients believed the opposite. Wealth begins when you demonstrate that you can wisely manage what you already possess. This idea appears repeatedly across ancient teachings. The wise were never obsessed with accumulation alone. They were concerned with character, discipline, and care. They understood that prosperity without stewardship quickly becomes destruction. Consider an old Egyptian temple where young scribes trained to become advisors to kings. Before they were entrusted with royal treasures, they spent years managing something far less glamorous. Inventory records, grain storage, irrigation schedules, and community supplies. Their teachers insisted that anyone who neglected small responsibilities could never be trusted with great ones. One inscription carved into a weathered stone reportedly advised, "He who wastes little things invites great loss." The lesson was practical but also symbolic. Money, like water, seeks capable channels. If the vessel leaks, pouring in more changes nothing. This truth remains remarkably relevant today. Imagine two neighbors who each receive the same unexpected inheritance. One immediately increases spending, chasing comforts long postponed. The other pauses. He repairs what is broken, eliminates unnecessary debt, invests patiently, and preserves part of the gift for future generations. Years later, one wonders why fortune disappeared so quickly. The other quietly enjoys lasting stability. The difference was never the amount received, it was stewardship. Psychologically, stewardship transforms identity. A person who consciously cares for resources begins to think differently. They no longer ask, "How can I get more?" Instead they ask, "How can I use what I already have wisely?" That subtle shift changes behavior. Care replaces carelessness. Purpose replaces impulse. Gratitude replaces entitlement. And behavior, repeated over time, becomes destiny. The Hermetic philosophers understood this through the law of cause and effect. Every financial condition carries invisible causes that precede visible results. Careful management, disciplined habits, and intentional decisions become seeds whose harvest may not appear immediately but inevitably arrives. Nothing multiplies accidentally. Even nature demonstrates this principle. A gardener who neglects healthy soil while dreaming of abundant fruit will harvest disappointment. Yet another who patiently nourishes the earth, even before seeing a single blossom, eventually gathers baskets filled beyond expectation. The fruit was not created at harvest. It was created in daily care. So it is with prosperity. Stewardship extends beyond money itself. It includes time, attention, relationships, knowledge, and health. Someone careless with their mornings often becomes careless with their finances. Someone disciplined in ordinary routines frequently discovers that discipline quietly expands into every area of life. The Stoics admired this internal order. Marcus Aurelius repeatedly reminded himself that greatness begins with governing one's own actions before attempting to govern circumstances. Seneca, despite possessing considerable wealth, warned that fortune favors those who have first mastered themselves. Self-mastery is stewardship of the inner world. Money merely magnifies whatever already exists there. If the mind is scattered, greater wealth often creates greater confusion. If the mind is ordered, even modest resources begin producing surprising abundance. This explains why some people rebuild prosperity after devastating losses, while others repeatedly lose fortunes. Their greatest asset was never external wealth. It was internal stewardship. Imagine two musicians receiving identical instruments. One leaves it neglected in a dusty corner. The other tunes it daily, practices patiently, and protects it from damage. Years later, one complains about poor opportunities while the other fills concert halls. The instrument was never the deciding factor. Faithful care was. The same invisible law governs money. Many ancient teachers even suggested beginning with acts so small they seemed insignificant. Organize your home, finish neglected tasks, treat every possession with respect, record every expense honestly. Save consistently. Even if the amount appears trivial, these habits are not merely financial techniques, they are declarations to your own mind. They say, "I am becoming someone who can be trusted with increase." The universe need not be imagined as rewarding these actions through magic. The transformation itself creates new possibilities. Order sharpens judgment. Discipline builds confidence. Responsibility attracts trust from others. Over time, opportunities naturally expand around someone who demonstrates reliability. Increase follows integrity. The old teacher in the valley knew this. The grain simply revealed what already lived inside each apprentice, one guarded from fear, one consumed without thought, one cultivated with wisdom. Only one multiplied. Chapter 2. Why some people repel wealth while others attract it effortlessly. Have you ever met someone who seems to move toward opportunity almost effortlessly? They remain calm during uncertainty, make thoughtful decisions under pressure, and somehow attract helpful relationships, meaningful work, and financial stability without appearing desperate. Then there are others who work tirelessly, worry constantly, chase every opportunity, and yet remain trapped in cycles of scarcity. The ancients believed this difference often began not in the marketplace but in the emotions. Long before modern psychology described emotional conditioning, Stoic philosophers observed that uncontrolled emotions create internal disorder, and internal disorder eventually manifests in outward decisions. Money does not merely respond to intelligence, it responds to judgment. And judgment is deeply influenced by emotional state. Imagine an experienced merchant preparing to cross a dangerous sea. As a sudden storm appears on the horizon, inexperienced sailors panic. Some abandon valuable cargo unnecessarily. Others change direction impulsively. Still others freeze completely. The captain, however, remains remarkably calm. He studies the winds, adjusts the sails, conserves supplies, and safely reaches the harbor. The storm affected everyone equally. Emotion determined the outcome. Financial life often unfolds the same way. Fear creates urgency. Urgency creates poor decisions. Poor decisions create painful consequences. Those consequences strengthen fear, and the cycle repeats. Ancient Stoicism sought to interrupt this cycle. Epictetus taught that external events themselves possess little power until the mind interprets them. Financial setbacks become devastating not only because of lost money but because they awaken hidden beliefs. I am unsafe. I will never recover. I always fail. These internal narratives silently govern behavior. Fear encourages desperate investments. Guilt prevents charging fair value. Shame causes avoidance of financial planning. Envy encourages reckless comparison. Each emotion quietly leaks energy away from clear judgment. Modern psychology now recognizes similar patterns. Emotional reasoning often overrides rational analysis, especially under financial stress. Decisions made from panic rarely produce lasting prosperity. The ancient teachers would simply nod. They understood this centuries ago. There is another emotion that quietly repels abundance: guilt. Many people unconsciously believe wealth is somehow incompatible with goodness. Perhaps they absorbed childhood messages that successful people are selfish or that financial ambition is inherently corrupt. Without realizing it, they sabotage opportunities whenever prosperity approaches. Their conscious mind desires abundance. Their unconscious emotions reject it. This creates contradiction. The Hermetic philosophers described harmony as essential to creation. When thoughts, emotions, and actions move in opposite directions, energy scatters rather than concentrates. It is like rowing a boat while one oar pulls forward and the other backward. Movement becomes exhausting. Contrast this with someone whose relationship with money is emotionally peaceful. They neither worship it nor fear it. They see it as a tool. They save without anxiety, spend without recklessness, give without resentment, invest without panic. Because money occupies its proper place, it no longer dominates the mind, ironically. This balanced attitude often produces greater prosperity than obsessive pursuit ever could. A Taoist story tells of an archer invited to compete before the emperor. While practicing alone in the forest, his aim was flawless. But standing before the royal court, consumed by fear of failure and hope for reward, his hands trembled. Every arrow missed. An old sage watching nearby remarked, "He has 2 targets now." The archer had stopped aiming at the mark. He had begun aiming at approval. The same happens financially. When every decision carries overwhelming emotional weight, clarity disappears. You are no longer serving wisdom, you are serving fear. Neutrality is not indifference. It is emotional freedom. The Stoics cultivated this deliberately. They trained themselves to pause before reacting, allowing reason to guide action instead of panic. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself that disturbing emotions lose much of their power once observed calmly rather than obeyed immediately. Imagine receiving unexpected financial news. Instead of reacting instantly, you breathe, you examine facts. You consider options, you respond deliberately. That single pause may save months or years of unnecessary struggle. Ancient masters knew that wealth rarely remains with a mind constantly at war with itself. Prosperity flourishes where there is internal order. This is why genuine abundance begins long before income changes. It begins when fear no longer commands your decisions, when guilt no longer rejects opportunity, when shame no longer defines your identity, when gratitude becomes stronger than anxiety. The goal is not emotional suppression, it is emotional mastery. Money itself carries no intention, it simply amplifies the character of the one who holds it. The calmer your inner world becomes, the clearer your financial decisions become. The clearer your decisions become, the more naturally opportunities reveal themselves. This is not mystical luck, it is disciplined awareness. The ancient secret is remarkably simple. Neutralize panic, reaction with observation, let wisdom speak before emotion does, and gradually the invisible barriers between you and abundance begin to dissolve. Manage your emotions, and your money will stop managing you. Chapter 3. Seneca's Secret Wealth. There is an ancient paradox that has puzzled kings, merchants, and philosophers alike. Why do some people possess vast fortunes yet live as prisoners of anxiety, while others own very little yet walk through life with remarkable peace? The Roman philosopher Seneca lived this paradox. Though remembered as one of history's greatest Stoics, he was also one of the wealthiest men in Rome. To many, this appeared to be a contradiction. How could a philosopher who preached simplicity possess immense riches? Yet Seneca's true lesson was never that wealth was evil. His lesson was far more subtle, and perhaps more dangerous to those who seek easy answers. Wealth itself was never the master. Desire was. Seneca often reminded his students that poverty does not automatically make a person virtuous, just as riches do not automatically corrupt. What enslaves the human spirit is not possession but dependence. The man who cannot sleep because he fears losing his gold is poorer than the shepherd who owns nothing yet greets each sunrise with gratitude. This forgotten distinction has echoed through centuries, but modern society often overlooks it. We measure wealth by accumulation instead of freedom. The ancients measured wealth by inner sovereignty. An old Roman tale tells of a wealthy merchant who sought out a respected philosopher after hearing whispers of his extraordinary wisdom. The merchant arrived with servants carrying expensive gifts, hoping to purchase whatever secret had made the philosopher so peaceful. When he entered the modest home, he found the old teacher eating simple bread beside a clay lamp. The merchant laughed politely. "Surely," he said, "if you possessed my fortune, you would live more comfortably." The philosopher smiled gently and replied, "If you possessed my peace, you would worry far less about your fortune." Those words struck the merchant like thunder. For years he had expanded his estates, multiplied his ships, and filled his vaults, yet every increase seemed only to produce another fear. New possessions required new guards. Larger fortunes demanded greater vigilance. Success had not ended his worries. It had simply enlarged them. The philosopher explained that wealth magnifies whatever already lives within a person. If the heart contains fear, More money gives fear a larger stage upon which to perform. If the heart contains gratitude, generosity, discipline, and wisdom, greater wealth becomes a tool rather than a chain. Money amplifies character. It rarely transforms it. This truth appears again and again throughout history. The Hermetic traditions taught that outer circumstances mirror inner states. Stoicism insisted that mastery begins within. Ancient wisdom literature repeatedly warned that the greatest empire a person could ever govern was not a nation but the kingdom of the self. Modern psychology quietly confirms much of this ancient insight. People who constantly fear scarcity often make financial decisions driven by panic rather than clarity. They chase opportunities too quickly, abandon plans too soon, or cling desperately to resources they should wisely invest. Their emotions become invisible advisors, whispering urgency into every decision. Meanwhile, individuals who cultivate emotional steadiness often notice possibilities others overlook. Their minds remain clear during uncertainty. They negotiate without desperation. They recognize opportunities because fear no longer blinds them. Their external success often appears effortless, but beneath that appearance lies years of disciplined inner work. Seneca understood something that many still struggle to accept. Money should never become the source of identity. Identity built upon possessions becomes fragile because possessions can disappear. Markets fluctuate, businesses fail, economies shift. But a disciplined character travels through every season untouched by external circumstances. Imagine carrying a cup filled to its very edge. Every unexpected movement spills its contents. Now imagine carrying the same cup only half full. You move freely without fear. Desire often fills the cup until every uncertainty threatens disaster. Inner mastery leaves room for movement, adaptation, and wisdom. The ancients did not reject prosperity. They rejected slavery to prosperity. There is another forgotten story about Seneca himself. During political upheaval in Rome, many powerful citizens lost everything almost overnight. Estates were seized, fortunes vanished, friends became enemies. Yet observers noted that Seneca's composure remained remarkably steady. His calm did not arise because he believed himself immune to loss. It arose because long before circumstances demanded detachment, he had already practiced it internally. Every day he reminded himself that everything external could change without warning. Far from making him pessimistic, this practice made him deeply grateful. Every possession became a temporary gift rather than a permanent entitlement. Gratitude replaced anxiety because nothing was assumed to last forever. This is one of the greatest hidden wealth practices ever taught. Appreciate without clinging, build without worshipping, prosper without becoming possessed by what you possess. True abundance begins where fear of losing ends. Prasta desire before income. Then income becomes your servant instead of your master. Chapter 4. Fear. The hidden tax. Most people believe taxes are collected by governments, banks, or institutions. Ancient wisdom reveals another kind of tax, one far more expensive than any imposed by law. It cannot be seen on financial statements, yet it quietly drains fortunes, opportunities, relationships, and peace of mind every single day. Its name is fear. Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome and one of history's greatest Stoic philosophers, ruled during wars, plagues, political conspiracies, and economic uncertainty. Every morning he awoke knowing that events beyond his control would unfold before sunset. Yet his writings reveal a remarkable secret. He understood that external events rarely destroyed people. Their uncontrolled reactions did. Fear is costly because it taxes judgment. An old story from the marketplaces of Alexandria tells of two grain traders facing the same terrible drought. Rumors spread that harvests would fail, and panic raced through the city like wildfire. The first trader immediately sold his entire inventory at desperate prices, convinced complete disaster was approaching. His fear demanded immediate action. The second trader listened carefully, observed patiently, and waited several days before making any decision. He understood that rumors often grow faster than reality itself. When official reports finally arrived, the harvest had indeed been smaller than expected, but nowhere near catastrophic. Grain prices soon doubled. The first merchant lost nearly everything. The second prospered. The difference was not intelligence, it was emotional government. Fear narrows perception. When the nervous system believes survival is threatened, the mind becomes obsessed with immediate escape rather than long-term wisdom. Ancient Stoics recognized this thousands of years before neuroscience began explaining how chronic fear limits rational thinking. The frightened mind sees only danger. The disciplined mind still sees possibilities. Marcus Aurelius repeatedly reminded himself that events are neutral until interpreted. A financial setback, an unexpected expense, a market downturn, or an economic recession all arrive first as facts. Fear immediately transforms those facts into personal catastrophe. Wisdom pauses before assigning meaning. This pause is priceless. Imagine standing beside a quiet lake at sunrise. When the surface is calm, every mountain reflects with astonishing clarity. Throw a single stone into the water, and the entire reflection becomes distorted. The mountains never moved, only the water changed. The human mind behaves the same way. Fear disturbs the surface of consciousness until every opportunity appears threatening, every conversation seems dangerous, and every uncertainty feels unbearable. Decisions made from such turbulence rarely create lasting prosperity. They simply create temporary relief followed by deeper anxiety. Ancient teachers often compared emotional discipline to steering a ship through storms. A skilled captain does not command the wind to stop blowing. He cannot silence the waves or calm the sea. His mastery lies elsewhere. He governs the helm. Likewise, wisdom does not promise a life free from financial uncertainty. It teaches mastery over one's response to uncertainty. There is a subtle difference between caution and fear. Caution observes reality carefully. Fear invents disasters before they exist. Caution prepares wisely. Fear exhausts itself imagining endless worst-case scenarios. One protects life. The other quietly consumes it. Hermetic philosophy speaks of mental transmutation, the ability to transform lower emotional states into higher ones through conscious awareness. This does not mean pretending fear is absent. It means refusing to let fear become commander of the mind. Observe it, learn from it, then choose deliberately rather than react impulsively. Modern investors unknowingly repeat this ancient lesson. Markets often swing most violently when collective fear reaches its peak. History repeatedly shows that panic causes countless individuals to abandon sound plans precisely when patience would have served them best. Emotional storms create expensive decisions. This hidden tax extends beyond money. Fear discourages generous conversations, delays meaningful opportunities, weakens relationships, and convinces capable people they are less prepared than they truly are. It steals possibilities long before circumstances ever have the chance. The antidote is not reckless optimism, it is calm perception. Each morning, Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that he controlled only his own judgments, choices, and actions. Everything else belonged to the unfolding order of life. By accepting this distinction, he reclaimed enormous mental energy that others wasted resisting the unavoidable. Imagine if every financial decision emerged not from panic but from clarity. Imagine negotiating without desperation, investing without obsession, saving without scarcity and giving without fear. Such a life is not built by eliminating uncertainty. It is built by strengthening the person who faces uncertainty. When fear no longer governs your choices, opportunities begin appearing where panic once saw only obstacles. Respond deliberately, not emotionally. That single discipline may become the greatest financial advantage you will ever possess. Chapter 5. Sowing and Reaping. Long before there were banks, investment portfolios, or financial advisors, humanity understood wealth through a far simpler image, a seed resting quietly in the palm of a farmer. Every civilization that depended upon the earth recognized an undeniable law. No harvest appeared without planting, no orchard emerged overnight. Every field reflected choices made long before the first fruit appeared. This ancient agricultural wisdom became one of humanity's greatest metaphors for life itself. Every action plants something. An old story tells of a wandering traveler who arrived in a village during harvest season. Golden wheat stretched across the hills, and every family celebrated months of faithful labor. Curious, the traveler asked an elderly farmer, "Which seed grows the fastest?" The old man smiled knowingly. "The one planted yesterday grows only in imagination." The traveler looked puzzled. The farmer continued, "People admire the harvest but forget the seasons hidden beneath it. They see abundance without remembering patience. They praise success without honoring preparation." That lesson reaches far beyond agriculture. Every conversation plants trust or suspicion. Every financial decision plants stability or instability. Every habit plants future character. Every generous act plants unseen relationships. Whether we recognize it or not, we spend each day scattering invisible seeds across the fields of tomorrow. Ancient wisdom traditions repeatedly return to this truth because it revealed something essential about prosperity. Results are rarely random. They often emerge from countless small causes quietly accumulating over time. The impatient mind focuses only on today's harvest. The wise mind focuses on today's planting. There is a tendency in every generation to admire visible success while overlooking invisible discipline. We notice the prosperous business but ignore decades of faithful service. We celebrate the respected teacher without seeing years devoted to study. We envy financial stability while forgetting the countless ordinary decisions that slowly created it. Nature refuses to be hurried. No amount of shouting persuades an apple tree to bear fruit before its season. Likewise, lasting prosperity follows rhythms that cannot be forced. The ancient idea of stewardship fits naturally within this law. A steward does not merely own resources. A steward cares for them wisely. Whether entrusted with money, knowledge, relationships, or opportunities, the steward asks a different question than the owner. Not how much can I take, but how well can I cultivate what has been placed in my care. This shift transforms everything. Imagine two gardeners receiving identical plots of land. The first constantly complains that his field is too small. Instead of planting, he spends his days wishing for larger property. The second quietly tends every corner of his modest garden. He removes weeds daily, waters faithfully, enriches the soil, and patiently waits. Years later, one field remains barren because it was neglected while dreaming of something greater. The other overflows with fruit because someone honored what already existed. Life often works the same way. Many people pray for greater opportunities while overlooking the responsibilities already resting in their hands. They seek larger incomes while neglecting current resources. They desire influence without first becoming trustworthy. Yet the ancient teachers insisted that increase usually follows faithful stewardship rather than replacing it. Hermetic philosophy calls this the law of cause and effect. Nothing appears without preceding causes. Every visible result began invisibly long before it entered public view. Modern psychology offers similar insight. Tiny daily habits compound over years into extraordinary outcomes. A single act seems insignificant. Repeated hundreds of times, it reshapes identity itself. Generosity belongs to this same hidden law. At first glance, generosity appears to reduce personal resources. Yet throughout history, generous individuals often became the centers of thriving communities. Why? Because generosity plants trust. Trust creates cooperation. Cooperation creates opportunities impossible for isolated individuals. This does not suggest giving recklessly or expecting immediate rewards. Farmers never scatter seeds expecting harvest by sunset. They give to the soil because they understand its rhythms. Likewise, wise generosity arises from abundance of spirit rather than desperation for return. An ancient merchant once taught his grandson a lesson by placing 2 leather pouches on a wooden table. One contained coins tightly tied shut. The other remained loosely open. "Which purse grows richer?" the boy asked. "The one that continues moving," replied the old merchant. He explained that money hidden forever serves no one. Resources wisely invested, shared, developed, and managed create value beyond themselves. Like seeds, wealth fulfills its purpose through thoughtful circulation rather than fearful stagnation. This principle applies beyond finances. Encouragement multiplies courage. Wisdom multiplies understanding. Kindness multiplies goodwill. Every noble action becomes a seed whose harvest often appears in unexpected places and unexpected seasons. There will always be moments when the field appears empty. The farmer knows this season well. Seeds disappear beneath the soil long before any visible evidence appears. To the impatient observer, nothing seems to be happening. Beneath the surface, however, unseen transformation has already begun. Many abandon worthy efforts because they mistake invisible growth for failure. The ancients urged patience. Trust the season. Continue planting. Continue cultivating. Eventually, what was hidden becomes visible. What was planted becomes harvest. So wisely every day, tomorrow is already growing beneath today's choices. Chapter 6. Taoism and the Flow of Prosperity. Long before modern economies, stock exchanges, or digital currencies existed, the ancient sages of China observed a law that governed not only rivers, forests, and seasons, but human prosperity itself. They noticed that nature never struggled to become abundant. Rivers did not force themselves downhill. Trees did not panic about producing fruit. The sun did not rush the dawn. Everything flourished because it moved in harmony with its own nature. From this quiet observation emerged one of Taoism's greatest teachings, Wu Wei, often translated as effortless action. To modern ears, effortless action sounds dangerously close to laziness. Many misunderstand it as an invitation to sit still and wait for fortune to arrive. The Taoist masters meant exactly the opposite. Wu Wei is not the absence of action. It is action without unnecessary resistance. It is disciplined effort guided by wisdom rather than anxiety. It is movement aligned with life's natural rhythms instead of constant struggle against them. The oldest bamboo grows slowly. A famous Taoist story tells of an elderly boatman who ferried travelers across a dangerous mountain river. During the rainy season, violent currents frightened even experienced sailors. Young men would grip their oars with white knuckles, fighting every wave until exhaustion overtook them. Yet the old boatman crossed the same waters with astonishing ease. One curious traveler finally asked, "Master, what secret allows you to conquer the river?" The old man laughed gently. "I never try to conquer it." The traveler frowned, confused. "I study its currents," the boatman continued. "I move when it moves. I pause when it slows. If I fight the river, I lose my strength. If I understand the river, it carries me farther than my own effort ever could. That lesson extends far beyond water. It describes the hidden relationship between human beings and prosperity. Many people spend their lives fighting invisible currents. They chase money with frantic urgency, believing constant pressure guarantees greater rewards. They work without rest, say yes to every opportunity, and exhaust themselves pursuing success. Yet the harder they push, the more distant fulfillment often becomes. Their effort produces motion but not necessarily progress. The Taoists observed something remarkable. Force creates friction. Friction consumes energy. Wisdom reduces unnecessary resistance so energy can flow toward meaningful action. Consider the farmer who impatiently digs up his seeds every morning to check whether they have begun growing. His effort is sincere, yet every inspection delays the harvest. Growth requires participation, but it also requires trust. Nature rewards consistent care, not anxious interference. Modern psychology quietly echoes this ancient principle. When people operate under chronic stress, their thinking narrows, creativity declines, relationships suffer, decision-making becomes reactive rather than thoughtful. In contrast, individuals who cultivate calm attention often recognize opportunities others overlook. Their minds remain flexible because they are not consumed by panic. This is why some entrepreneurs appear almost magnetic. Outsiders assume fortune simply favors them. In reality, many have learned to replace frantic chasing with steady value creation. They focus less on desperately pursuing money and more on becoming someone whose work naturally creates value for others. Wealth often follows usefulness. The Tao Te Ching teaches that forcing rarely produces lasting harmony. Water, the softest substance in nature, slowly shapes mountains not through violence but through persistence. Day after day, year after year, it continues flowing without frustration. Eventually, even stone yields. Prosperity follows a remarkably similar pattern. Small daily disciplines quietly accumulate into extraordinary results. A thoughtful conversation builds trust. Trust creates relationships. Relationships create opportunities. Opportunities create abundance. None of these steps can be rushed without weakening the entire structure. There is another forgotten story told among Taoist scholars about a young merchant who desperately wanted to become the richest trader in his province. Every morning he compared himself with competitors. Every evening he counted their profits instead of improving his own craft. His sleep disappeared, his joy vanished. Success became an obsession rather than a purpose. One day he sought guidance from an elderly sage living beyond the village. "I work harder than everyone," the merchant complained. "Why does wealth still escape me?" The sage handed him 2 clay jars. One was filled with clear water, the other remained empty. "Pour the full jar into the empty one." The merchant obeyed. "Now continue pouring." "I cannot," he replied. "The first jar is empty." The sage smiled. "You have spent years trying to pour from an empty spirit. You chase wealth while neglecting wisdom, health, gratitude, and peace. Refill yourself first. Then your work will naturally overflow." The merchant did not immediately become wealthy, but he changed his priorities. Instead of obsessing over income, he refined his skills, treated customers with genuine care, managed resources wisely, and approached each day with greater calm. Slowly his reputation spread. Opportunities multiplied. Prosperity arrived not because he forced it, but because he became someone capable of sustaining it. The Hermetic philosophers expressed a similar truth through another language. They taught that external conditions often mirror internal order. A chaotic mind frequently creates chaotic decisions. An ordered mind produces deliberate action. Taoism reaches the same destination from another direction. Inner harmony naturally influences outer results. This does not mean life will always be easy. Rivers still contain rapids, seasons still bring storms, markets still fluctuate. Yet those who cultivate Wu Wei respond differently. They adapt instead of panic. They observe instead of react. They move with changing conditions instead of exhausting themselves, resisting them. Money itself behaves like water. Attempt to grip water tightly, and it slips through your fingers. Cup your hands wisely, and it remains available for use. Prosperity is often sustained not by desperate control, but by intelligent stewardship and balanced movement. Replace chasing with consistency. The river rewards those who learn its rhythm. Chapter 7. The Inner Kingdom of Abundance. There is an ancient mystery that has echoed through the world's oldest wisdom traditions, whispered in temples, carried through desert monasteries, and preserved by philosophers who believed humanity had forgotten its greatest inheritance. They insisted that true abundance is never discovered first in the marketplace. It is discovered in consciousness. Before wealth appears in the hands, it must awaken in the mind. Before prosperity enters a person's life, it quietly reshapes the way that person sees the world. Most people search outward while remaining blind inward. That is why two individuals can stand before the same opportunity and see entirely different realities. One notices only obstacles, competition and scarcity. The other sees possibilities, relationships and untapped value. The world has not changed between them. Only their perception has. Ancient teachers often describe this condition as a kind of inner blindness. Not blindness of the eyes, but blindness of awareness. A person may possess intelligence, education, and experience, yet still overlook the countless opportunities surrounding them because their mind has become conditioned to expect lack. A forgotten story tells of an old traveler who arrived in a mountain village carrying nothing more than a weathered walking staff and a small cloth bag. The villagers assumed he was poor because his clothing was simple and his possessions few. One evening, several young men gathered around him and asked how he survived with so little. The traveler smiled. "I own something greater than coins." The young men laughed. What treasure could possibly be greater than gold? He reached into his bag and removed a tiny polished mirror. "Look." One by one they stared into it. "What do you see?" he asked. "Our own faces," the traveler nodded. "Exactly. Every person who seeks abundance eventually meets the same obstacle themselves. If your thoughts are ruled by fear, no amount of wealth will satisfy you. If your heart is governed by gratitude, even small blessings become seeds of greater abundance. The villagers remembered those words long after the traveler continued his journey. This simple story reveals one of the oldest principles of prosperity. Human beings rarely experience life exactly as it is. They experience life through the lens of their expectations, beliefs, and emotional habits. When the mind becomes convinced that there is never enough, it unconsciously filters reality for evidence supporting that belief. Opportunities become invisible because attention has already been trained to notice only limitation. Modern psychology calls this selective attention. Ancient sages simply called it blindness. The Hermetic philosophers expressed the same principle through another language, as within, so without. They understood that internal order often shapes external experience, not because thoughts magically replace action, but because consciousness influences perception, and perception guides behavior. A hopeful mind notices possibilities that a fearful mind ignores. A grateful person builds relationships that an anxious person may unknowingly damage. Inner attitudes quietly shape outer outcomes. This is why gratitude occupies such an honored place in ancient wisdom traditions. Gratitude is not merely good manners or positive thinking. It is a discipline of perception. It trains the mind to recognize resources that already exist instead of obsessing over what is missing. Imagine walking through a vast orchard while focusing only on the few branches without fruit. Eventually, you convince yourself the entire orchard is barren. Another traveler walks the same path and notices hundreds of healthy trees heavy with harvest. They inhabit the same place, yet experience entirely different worlds. Life often unfolds this way. Gratitude widens perception, complaint narrows it. There is another ancient parable about a potter who produced beautiful clay vessels admired throughout the kingdom. One apprentice constantly complained that the workshop lacked enough tools, better ovens, and finer clay. Another quietly mastered every tool already available. Years later, the second apprentice became a renowned craftsman, while the first continued blaming circumstances. The master potter explained the difference. The grateful student discovered possibilities inside limitations. The resentful student discovered only more limitations. Prosperity begins with this subtle shift. It asks not, "What is missing?" but, "What has already been placed in my care?" This question transforms ordinary living. Instead of seeing a modest income as evidence of failure, one begins asking how it might be managed wisely. Instead of resenting present skills, one asks how they may be refined. Instead of comparing possessions with others, one develops the ability to multiply existing resources. Ancient wisdom consistently teaches that abundance rarely arrives as a sudden miracle. More often it grows from faithful awareness. The Stoics also understood this hidden kingdom. Marcus Aurelius repeatedly reminded himself to appreciate what was already present rather than constantly longing for what remained beyond reach. His gratitude was not passive contentment. It became the foundation for disciplined action. A peaceful mind makes wiser decisions than a restless one. Money itself cannot eliminate inner emptiness. History is filled with wealthy individuals who remained haunted by dissatisfaction because they expected possessions to accomplish what only inner transformation could provide. They mistook acquisition for fulfillment. The true kingdom of abundance cannot be purchased. It is cultivated when gratitude becomes habitual. Generosity follows naturally. When generosity grows, trust expands. Trust creates relationships. Relationships create opportunities. Opportunities create prosperity. What begins as an invisible shift within often ripples outward in ways impossible to predict. This is why the greatest treasure is not hidden inside vaults, but inside awareness. Practice abundance before possession. The richest field is always the one first cultivated within. Chapter 8. Order creates prosperity. One of the greatest surprises awaiting students of ancient wisdom is that nearly every civilization associated prosperity with order long before it associated it with wealth. The magnificent temples of Egypt, the disciplined monasteries of the East, the academies of Greece, and the libraries of Alexandria all shared one invisible principle. Before wisdom could flourish, chaos had to be reduced. Before abundance could be sustained, order had to be established. This was not merely architectural discipline, it was psychological discipline. The ancient temple builders believed that every carefully aligned stone reflected an invisible harmony within the human spirit. Disorder outside often mirrored disorder inside. By creating environments of balance, clarity, and intentionality, they believed individuals became more capable of clear thought, wise judgment, and responsible action. Modern neuroscience quietly agrees. Clutter competes for attention. Constant disorder increases mental fatigue. Every unfinished task occupies subtle psychological space. Ancient teachers discovered this through observation thousands of years before laboratories existed. A story survives about an Egyptian apprentice who desperately wished to learn the deepest secrets of sacred mathematics. On his first morning inside the temple, however, the high priest handed him nothing more than a simple broom. The young man felt insulted. "I came seeking wisdom," he protested. The priest smiled. "And wisdom has already begun." For several weeks the apprentice swept hallways, arranged scrolls, cleaned lamps, and organized tools. Finally, frustrated beyond measure, he demanded to know why he had not yet been taught the hidden mysteries. The old priest placed a dusty bronze mirror before him. "What do you see, my reflection?" The priest wiped the mirror clean with a cloth. "And now?" "My reflection is clearer." The priest nodded. "The mind works exactly the same way." Only then did the apprentice understand that order was never the final lesson. It was preparation for receiving greater understanding. Financial life follows this same forgotten principle. Many people dream of earning more money while remaining uncertain where current money disappears. They seek larger opportunities without developing greater responsibility. Yet prosperity often refuses to remain where disorder constantly consumes it. Imagine pouring fresh water into a cracked vessel. No matter how often it is filled, the contents continue leaking away. The solution is not merely adding more water. The vessel itself must first be repaired. Financial disorder behaves similarly. Untracked expenses, forgotten obligations, emotional spending, neglected savings, and constant confusion quietly drain resources regardless of income level. More money temporarily enlarges the vessel but does not mend its cracks. Ancient wisdom called this stewardship. Stoic philosophy approached the same truth differently. The Stoics believed external order strengthened internal discipline. A person capable of governing daily habits became increasingly capable of governing larger responsibilities. Self-command rarely appears suddenly during moments of crisis. It develops gradually through ordinary routines faithfully practiced. There is a remarkable pattern throughout history. Many of the world's greatest builders, philosophers, inventors, and leaders shared an appreciation for daily structure. Their calendars reflected priorities. Their workspaces supported concentration. Their finances were managed deliberately rather than emotionally. Calm creates better decisions. Chaos encourages impulsive ones. This principle becomes especially important during financial uncertainty. When accounts are organized, expenses understood, and responsibilities clearly acknowledged, fear loses much of its power. Clarity replaces confusion. Planning replaces guessing. Confidence grows not because circumstances become perfect, but because awareness becomes stronger. A wise merchant once instructed his children by placing two ledgers before them. One contained carefully recorded transactions reaching back 20 years, the other remained completely blank. "Which ledger creates prosperity?" he asked. His youngest son pointed toward the book filled with numbers. The merchant gently shook his head. "Neither." The children looked puzzled. The prosperous life belongs to the person disciplined enough to keep writing. The lesson was profound. Prosperity is sustained not by occasional moments of brilliance, but by ordinary habits repeated consistently over time. The Taoists described this as harmony. The Hermetic philosophers described it as correspondence. The Stoics described it as discipline, different languages, the same wisdom. Every receipt organized, every debt understood, every expense reviewed, every saving habit maintained becomes another stone placed into the foundation of lasting abundance. These actions appear small in isolation, yet together they create remarkable stability. The greatest financial transformations rarely begin with sudden windfalls. They begin with quiet order. Bring order to your finances. When your outer world becomes clearer, your inner world often follows, and where clarity grows, wise prosperity finds fertile ground. Chapter 9: The Alchemy of Gratitude. There comes a moment in almost every life when a person quietly realizes that two people can possess the same amount of money, the same opportunities, and even the same outward circumstances, yet one lives in constant scarcity while the other lives with a profound sense of abundance. The difference is rarely found in their bank accounts. It is found in the invisible chemistry of their minds. The ancients understood this mystery long before modern psychology gave it a name. They believed gratitude was a form of inner alchemy, a force capable of transforming ordinary experience into extraordinary richness. Gold is first refined in fire. The human heart is refined through gratitude. An old story tells of a widowed woman who lived alone on the edge of a small village. Her cottage was modest, her clothes were worn, and her possessions could fit inside a single wooden chest. Yet travelers often left her home, convinced they had visited one of the wealthiest people in the region. One day, a successful merchant, puzzled by her cheerful spirit, asked, "How can you smile when you own so little?" The old woman poured 2 cups of tea. "I own more than you imagine." The merchant looked around the tiny room. "I see almost nothing," she smiled gently. "That is because you are counting objects. I am counting blessings." She pointed toward the window. "I have another sunrise." She lifted the teacup. "I have warm hands to hold this cup." She placed a hand over her heart. "I have memories that no thief can steal." The merchant fell silent. He had spent decades accumulating wealth, yet had forgotten how to appreciate any of it. That evening he returned to his magnificent estate, feeling strangely poor. This forgotten parable reveals one of the oldest secrets of prosperity. Gratitude changes what we notice. It does not magically increase possessions overnight, but it transforms perception. And perception quietly shapes every decision that follows. The Hermetic philosophers taught that the mind possesses the power of mental transmutation, the ability to change one's inner condition without waiting for outer circumstances to change first. Gratitude is one of its purest expressions. It does not deny hardship. It simply refuses to allow hardship to become the only story being told. Modern psychology supports this ancient observation. When individuals intentionally practice gratitude, their attention gradually shifts away from chronic deficiency toward existing resources and meaningful possibilities. They become less reactive, more resilient, and often more creative when facing challenges. The external world may remain unchanged, but the internal relationship with it becomes remarkably different. This is why gratitude has always been considered a discipline rather than an emotion. Anyone can feel grateful when life unfolds exactly as planned. Wisdom appears when gratitude survives uncertainty. The Stoics practiced this principle with remarkable consistency. Marcus Aurelius often reminded himself not to begin each day complaining about what remained beyond his control, but appreciating the opportunities already entrusted to him. Gratitude for him was not passive optimism. It became a source of emotional resilience. A grateful mind is less easily shaken because it continually remembers that value already exists within the present moment. There is another ancient story about 2 brothers who inherited equal portions of farmland after their father's death. One brother spent every season complaining that his fields were smaller than his neighbors. He constantly postponed planting while waiting for better conditions. The second brother walked the boundaries of his land every morning. He thanked the earth before beginning his work, repaired broken fences, cared for the soil, and faithfully planted each season. Years later, visitors admired the flourishing orchards of the younger brother, while the elder still blamed fate for his empty fields. When asked about his success, the younger brother replied with quiet simplicity, "I learned to love the field before expecting it to feed me." His words contained profound wisdom. Gratitude strengthens stewardship. Stewardship creates increase. Those who appreciate what they already possess are often more inclined to protect it, improve it, and multiply it. Those consumed by dissatisfaction frequently neglect the very resources capable of changing their future. This principle extends beyond finances. Grateful parents invest more deeply in their families. Grateful teachers inspire their students. Grateful leaders strengthen their communities. Grateful entrepreneurs create businesses rooted in service rather than desperation. The harvest of gratitude reaches far beyond material prosperity. There is another hidden dimension to this ancient practice. Gratitude softens fear. Fear constantly whispers, "There will never be enough." Gratitude quietly answers, "Look how much has already been given." These opposing voices shape entirely different lives. The fearful mind rushes, the grateful mind observes. The fearful mind hoards, the grateful mind manages wisely. The fearful mind reacts, the grateful mind responds deliberately. This emotional stability often becomes a tremendous advantage during financial uncertainty. Instead of making impulsive decisions born from panic, grateful individuals remain capable of careful thought. They see options where anxiety sees only catastrophe. Ancient wisdom never suggested pretending difficulties do not exist. Rather, it taught that gratitude prevents hardship from becoming the master of one's consciousness. Every morning offers another opportunity to practice this inner alchemy before reviewing accounts, checking investments, or worrying about future expenses. Pause for a few moments and acknowledge what already exists. Health, relationships, knowledge, experience, opportunities, lessons learned through failure, and even the strength gained from past hardships all belong to the wealth that cannot be measured by numbers alone. When practiced faithfully, gratitude becomes more than a habit. It becomes a way of seeing. Daily gratitude quietly transforms ordinary lives into abundant ones, because it teaches the heart to recognize treasures that anxious eyes continually overlook. Practice gratitude before seeking more. The richest soil is always an appreciative heart. Chapter 10, Prosperity Without Inner Peace. Imagine a man standing inside a magnificent home overlooking the sea. Every room contains expensive furniture. His investments have multiplied beyond anything he imagined in his youth. His name appears in financial magazines, and strangers admire his achievements. Yet every night he lies awake, staring into darkness, fearing the loss of everything he has built. Outwardly wealthy, inwardly exhausted, this silent contradiction has accompanied human civilization for thousands of years. The ancients observed that wealth can purchase comfort, opportunity, and security, but it cannot purchase peace. Inner tranquility belongs to an entirely different treasury. A forgotten story speaks of a king who possessed more gold than any neighboring ruler. His palace overflowed with precious stones, rare spices, and magnificent works of art collected from distant lands. Yet despite possessing almost everything imaginable, he became increasingly restless. One evening he disguised himself as an ordinary traveler and wandered beyond the palace walls. Deep within a quiet forest, he discovered an elderly woodcutter sharing a simple meal beside a small fire. The king asked, "Are you happy?" The old man smiled. "I slept well last night." The king frowned. "I asked if you were happy." The woodcutter answered again. "I slept well." Confused, the king pressed further. "I own kingdoms and cannot sleep peacefully. You own almost nothing. How is this possible?" The old man looked toward the stars. "You protect your possessions." He gently placed another piece of wood upon the fire. "My peace protects me." The king returned to his palace carrying a lesson far more valuable than another chest of treasure. The Stoic philosophers repeatedly explored this mystery. Seneca, despite being enormously wealthy, warned that prosperity becomes dangerous when possessions begin possessing the owner. Wealth itself is not the problem. Attachment is. Marcus Aurelius echoed this wisdom from the throne of an empire. He reminded himself that external fortune changes constantly. Peace must therefore be built upon something more stable than circumstances. Many people unknowingly exchange one form of poverty for another. They escape financial scarcity only to become prisoners of anxiety, comparison, endless ambition, and fear of loss. The size of the bank account changes, the restlessness remains. Ancient teachers recognized this pattern because they observed the human mind carefully. They understood that desire rarely ends by satisfying itself. Without inner discipline, every achievement simply creates another craving. Every milestone becomes another starting line. The horizon forever retreats. This endless pursuit quietly steals the very joy people hoped prosperity would provide. There is nothing inherently wrong with pursuing financial success. The problem begins when success becomes the sole measure of life's value. The Taoist sages offered a different perspective. They believed genuine prosperity resembles a healthy river. It flows steadily, nourishes everything it touches, and never forgets its purpose. A river that attempts to keep all its water eventually becomes a stagnant swamp. Likewise, wealth fulfills its highest purpose when balanced with generosity, gratitude, wisdom, and freedom. Otherwise, abundance becomes another form of bondage. Consider a successful merchant who spends decades building an extraordinary business. If every waking moment becomes consumed by protecting profits, monitoring competitors, and fearing future decline, what has truly been gained? Financial freedom without emotional freedom remains incomplete. Peace is the hidden profit. This is why many ancient wisdom traditions measured wealth differently. They asked, "Can you sleep peacefully? Can you remain generous during uncertainty? Can you lose possessions without losing yourself? Can you enjoy abundance without becoming dependent upon it?" These questions reveal a deeper accounting than any financial statement. The Proverbs speak repeatedly about wisdom creating lasting stability, while Stoicism reminds us that self-command remains the highest form of ownership. Together they suggest that true prosperity is built from two foundations: external stewardship and internal peace. One without the other eventually collapses. The wealthy person who lacks peace often becomes poorer than the modest laborer who greets each morning with gratitude and each evening with contentment. This does not diminish the value of financial success. Rather, it restores its proper place. Money becomes a remarkable servant but a destructive master. Prosperity reaches its fullest expression when resources support a peaceful life instead of replacing it. The greatest investment is not merely growing income, it is protecting the calm mind capable of enjoying it. Measure success by peace as well as profit. When abundance and inner freedom walk together, wealth finally fulfills its highest purpose. Chapter 11. The Prosperous Mind. There is an ancient observation that appears in many forms across the world's oldest wisdom traditions. People rarely rise permanently above the picture they carry of themselves. They may experience moments of fortune, unexpected opportunities, or temporary success. But unless their inner identity grows alongside their circumstances, they often return to familiar patterns. The ancients understood that prosperity is not sustained merely by acquiring more. It is sustained by becoming someone capable of carrying more with wisdom. Identity silently directs destiny. A forgotten tale tells of a young man who inherited a thriving vineyard from his grandfather. The vines had produced abundant harvests for generations, and merchants traveled from distant cities to purchase its wine. Yet within only a few years the estate began to decline. The young heir blamed drought. He blamed dishonest workers. He blamed changing markets. Finally, an elderly gardener who had served the family for decades approached him. "The vineyard has not forgotten how to grow," the old man said softly. "It is waiting for its steward to remember how to care." The young man was offended. "I own this vineyard." The gardener nodded. "Ownership is given by law. Stewardship is earned by character." Those words lingered in the young man's mind. Instead of searching for another miracle harvest, he began waking before sunrise. He walked every row of vines, learned the rhythm of the seasons, repaired neglected fences, studied the soil, and listened carefully to experienced workers. Years later, the vineyard flourished once again. The land had not changed, the steward had. This ancient story contains a profound truth about prosperity. External circumstances matter, but the mind guiding those circumstances matters even more. The person who thinks only about immediate pleasure often sacrifices tomorrow for today. The person who thinks like a faithful steward naturally begins protecting the future while wisely managing the present. This difference begins with identity. The Stoics believed that every action grows from an underlying character. Marcus Aurelius repeatedly reminded himself that each decision either strengthened or weakened the person he was becoming. Wealth, in this view, was not primarily a collection of possessions. It was an opportunity to exercise wisdom, discipline, generosity, and self-command. Money simply magnifies habits. If a person is careless with little, abundance often enlarges carelessness. If someone practices thoughtful stewardship before wealth arrives, greater resources usually expand that same wisdom. Ancient philosophers observed this repeatedly because they studied human nature more carefully than human possessions. The prosperous mind therefore asks different questions. Instead of asking, "How can I become rich quickly?" it asks, "What kind of person must I become to sustain abundance honorably?" Instead of chasing every opportunity, it develops discernment. Instead of reacting emotionally, it responds deliberately. Instead of consuming every increase, it preserves, multiplies, and shares wisely. These shifts appear small, yet they quietly reshape an entire lifetime. There is another story about two apprentices learning under a respected merchant. Whenever profits increased, the first immediately imagined new luxuries to purchase. The second quietly asked how the business might become stronger. When losses arrived, the first panicked. The second learned. When opportunities appeared, the first hesitated because he feared failure. The second evaluated carefully and acted with confidence. Many years later, the elder merchant prepared to retire. The townspeople assumed he would choose the apprentice with greater charisma and ambition. Instead, he entrusted everything to the quieter student. Someone asked why. The merchant answered with remarkable simplicity, "I was never searching for the cleverest mind. I was searching for the safest hands." That answer reveals the heart of stewardship. Prosperity seeks trustworthy character. Ancient wisdom consistently places responsibility before increase because responsibility protects increase. A prosperous mind recognizes that every resource, whether money, knowledge, influence, relationships, or time, has been entrusted rather than merely possessed. This understanding changes financial behavior dramatically. Spending becomes intentional rather than impulsive. Saving becomes preparation rather than fear. Investing becomes service to the future rather than gambling against uncertainty. Generosity becomes an expression of confidence rather than loss. Even setbacks acquire new meaning. Instead of interpreting every financial mistake as personal failure, the prosperous mind treats difficulties as teachers. Ancient craftsmen expected early errors while mastering their trade. Likewise, wise stewards understand that experience often arrives disguised as disappointment. The Hermetic philosophers expressed a similar principle through the law of cause and effect. Today's financial condition reflects countless decisions accumulated over time. Tomorrow's condition will arise from today's choices. The future is quietly being shaped long before it becomes visible. Long-term thinking creates quiet power. This mindset also protects people from comparison. Those obsessed with competing against others often neglect cultivating themselves. They measure success through appearances rather than substance. The prosperous mind asks not whether it possesses more than someone else, but whether it has become wiser than it was yesterday. That is genuine growth. There comes a stage in life, especially for those who have witnessed decades of changing fortunes, when a deeper realization emerges. Wealth is no longer measured merely by accumulation, but by the ability to preserve peace, strengthen family, create opportunity, and leave behind something that continues blessing others. This is abundance with purpose. The vineyard prospers because the steward prospers first. Become the person who manages abundance wisely. Character is the greatest investment any fortune can make. Chapter 12. The Ancient Secret of Lasting Abundance. Across thousands of years, civilizations separated by deserts, mountains, languages, and oceans arrived at a remarkably similar conclusion. Whether one sat beside a Taoist sage in ancient China, listened to a Stoic philosopher in Rome, studied the Hermetic mysteries of Egypt, or reflected upon timeless wisdom preserved through generations, one lesson quietly emerged again and again. Lasting abundance begins within. The words differed, the symbols differed, the stories differed, yet the principle remained astonishingly consistent. The Hermetic teachers declared, "As within, so without." The Stoics urged mastery over oneself, or attempting to master circumstances. The Taoists taught that life flows most naturally toward those who stop resisting its deeper rhythms. Ancient wisdom traditions celebrated stewardship, gratitude, patience, discipline, and integrity long before they praised prosperity itself. Different paths, one destination. There is an old legend about 4 travelers who climbed a sacred mountain from different directions. One journeyed through forests, another crossed a vast desert. A third climbed steep cliffs beside rushing waterfalls. The fourth followed a winding valley beneath towering peaks. When they finally reached the summit, they argued fiercely about which route was correct. An elderly hermit who lived upon the mountain quietly listened. After they finished debating, he smiled. "You speak as though the mountain had 4 summits." The travelers looked around. There was only one. Likewise, the world's enduring wisdom traditions repeatedly point toward the same hidden summit, inner mastery before outer mastery. This ancient understanding reshapes prosperity itself. Wealth is no longer viewed merely as possession, but as alignment. Alignment between thought and action, between values and habits, between intention and behavior, between opportunity and responsibility. Without this harmony, abundance becomes unstable. Imagine constructing a magnificent palace upon shifting sand. The walls may appear impressive for a season, but eventually hidden instability reveals itself. Ancient builders devoted extraordinary attention to foundations because they understood that invisible strength determines visible endurance. Human character functions similarly. Integrity becomes the foundation, discipline becomes the structure, wisdom becomes the architect, prosperity becomes the natural consequence of careful construction. The Taoists beautifully illustrated this through nature. Observe a great oak tree. It does not struggle anxiously toward the sky. It develops deep roots first. Storms arrive, seasons change, drought comes and goes. Yet the rooted tree continues growing because its hidden strength exceeds its visible height. The prosperous life follows the same law. People often admire visible success while overlooking the invisible habits that sustain it. Calm decision-making, emotional discipline, consistent learning, honest relationships, responsible stewardship, quiet patience. These qualities rarely appear on financial statements, yet they determine whether wealth survives or disappears. The Stoics would have recognized this immediately. Seneca warned repeatedly that fortune without virtue becomes dangerous because external abundance magnifies internal weakness. The disciplined individual remains steady whether wealth increases or decreases because identity has never depended entirely upon possessions. This freedom is priceless. Another ancient story speaks of a temple guardian entrusted with protecting an enormous treasury. Every day, merchants, nobles, and travelers pass through its gates carrying gold, silver, and precious jewels. A curious visitor finally asked the guardian, "How can you spend your entire life surrounded by riches without becoming consumed by them?" The old guardian smiled. "I was never appointed to own the treasure." He placed a hand over his heart. "I was appointed to protect it." That answer contains perhaps the deepest secret of lasting abundance. Stewardship transforms ownership into responsibility. The person who believes everything exists solely for personal gratification eventually exhausts both resources and relationships. The steward understands that every blessing carries purpose beyond immediate pleasure. Money becomes a tool for creating value. Knowledge becomes something to share. Influence becomes an opportunity to encourage others. Time becomes an investment rather than something merely spent. This perspective generates remarkable stability because it removes the endless hunger that often accompanies material success. Enough gradually becomes possible. The ancient wisdom traditions never condemned prosperity itself. They warned only against allowing prosperity to replace wisdom. Wealth guided by character becomes profoundly constructive. Wealth separated from character often becomes destructive. Therefore, the final secret is surprisingly simple, Amelson. When values shape decisions, when gratitude tempers ambition, when discipline guides opportunity, when generosity accompanies increase, when peace remains greater than profit, prosperity acquires lasting meaning. The external world will always fluctuate. Markets rise and fall, empires appear and disappear, technologies transform civilizations. Yet these deeper principles continue surviving every generation because they describe enduring aspects of human nature. The greatest fortunes eventually change hands. The greatest character becomes inheritance. That is why the oldest teachers rarely asked, "How much do you possess?" they asked. "Who are you becoming?" The answer to that question quietly determines every other answer that follows. Align your values with your actions. When inner order and outer stewardship walk together, abundance ceases to be a temporary visitor and becomes a faithful companion shaped by wisdom rather than chance. Chapter 13. The Hermetic Law of Correspondence. Among the oldest teachings ever preserved, few have inspired more fascination than the mysterious Hermetic principle, known simply as within, so without. For centuries it was whispered among seekers of wisdom, copied into hidden manuscripts, and contemplated by philosophers who believed it revealed one of the invisible laws governing human life. They did not mean that every external event is magically created by thought alone. Rather, they observed something both practical and profound. The inner world quietly shapes the outer world through perception, choices, habits, relationships, and character. The outer mirrors the inner. Imagine standing before a perfectly still lake at sunrise. The mountains, clouds, and sky appear clearly upon its surface, but disturb the water with constant waves, and the reflection becomes distorted. The mountains have not changed. Only the surface reflecting them has. The ancient Hermetic teachers believed the human mind behaves much the same way. When fear, confusion, resentment, and panic dominate consciousness, judgment becomes clouded. Opportunities are overlooked. Wise counsel is ignored. Relationships become strained. Financial decisions become reactive rather than thoughtful. When clarity, discipline, gratitude, and calm govern the mind, those same opportunities appear differently. Problems become manageable. Creative ideas emerge. People become easier to trust, and trust often becomes the beginning of prosperity. The mirror changes everything. There is an old Hermetic story about a young student who traveled across deserts seeking the legendary Master of Mirrors. After many months, he finally reached an ancient sanctuary carved into stone cliffs. Expecting to discover rooms filled with magical mirrors capable of revealing hidden futures, he instead found only an elderly teacher polishing a simple bronze disc. Disappointed, the student asked, "Where are the sacred mirrors?" The master held up the polished bronze. "This is one." The young man frowned. "It shows only my face." The old teacher smiled. "Then you have not yet learned to see." For many months the student remained in the sanctuary. He expected lessons in secret symbols and mystical rituals, but each morning the master gave him ordinary tasks: sweeping the courtyard, tending a small garden, recording daily thoughts, observing his emotions, and reflecting upon every important decision. Finally, the student grew impatient. "I came here to learn how reality changes." The master handed him the bronze mirror once again. "What do you see now?" The student looked carefully. "I see someone who blames circumstances before examining himself." The master nodded. Now the mirror has begun teaching. Years later, the student became known not because he possessed supernatural powers, but because his calm judgment, disciplined thinking, and balanced character transformed everything he touched. The mirror had always been within him. This ancient parable captures the heart of the Hermetic law of correspondence. The principle invites self-examination before accusation. It asks not merely, "Why is my financial life this way?" but also, "What habits, beliefs, fears, or assumptions might be quietly contributing to my experience?" This question is not about blame. It is about responsibility. Responsibility is empowering because it returns attention to what can actually be influenced. The Stoics taught something remarkably similar. Epictetus repeatedly reminded his students that external events are often beyond complete control, but inner responses remain theirs to govern. Hermetic philosophy extends this wisdom by suggesting that those inner responses gradually influence the quality of future external circumstances through consistent action. Mental transmutation becomes essential here. The Hermetic teachers believe that emotions and thoughts are not fixed identities, but conditions capable of refinement. Fear may become courage, confusion may become clarity, envy may become inspiration. Scarcity thinking may become stewardship thinking. This transformation does not happen through empty affirmation. It happens through disciplined awareness. Consider two merchants opening identical shops in the same town. One approaches every customer expecting disappointment. He suspects dishonesty, fears failure, and constantly worries about competitors. The other treats each visitor with curiosity, fairness, patience, and confidence. Months later, their businesses often look very different. Not because the universe favored one arbitrarily, because inner attitudes quietly shaped countless daily interactions. Trust attracted relationships, calm improved decisions, integrity built reputation. The inner gradually influenced the outer. This is correspondence in motion. The Hermetic sages also insisted that wealth consciousness has little to do with greed. It is not an obsession with acquiring more, but an understanding that abundance grows where value, responsibility, and wisdom consistently meet. The truly prosperous person does not merely ask how to increase income. They ask, how can I increase wisdom? How can I increase usefulness? How can I become more trustworthy? How can I serve more effectively? These questions reshape financial behavior because they transform identity first. Every morning, the ancient initiates practiced quiet observation before beginning their work. Some contemplated their intentions. Others reflected upon emotional disturbances requiring correction. They believed mastering the unseen world of thought prepared them to master the visible world of action. Their greatest laboratory was consciousness. Their greatest experiment was character. Their greatest reward was inner freedom. The same invitation remains available today. Before examining markets, investments, salaries, or opportunities, examine the invisible assumptions guiding your choices. Replace panic with patience. Replace resentment with gratitude. Replace impulsiveness with thoughtful stewardship. The mirror always responds. The outer mirrors the inner. Cultivate the unseen wisely, and the visible often begins changing in ways both practical and profound. Chapter 14. How Gratitude Changes Financial Vision. One of the greatest misconceptions about gratitude is that it belongs only to moments of comfort and success. Ancient wisdom teaches precisely the opposite. Gratitude becomes most powerful when circumstances tempt the heart toward fear. It is then that gratitude ceases to be a pleasant emotion and becomes a way of seeing. Gratitude changes vision. A traveler once crossed a dry valley searching for a prosperous city rumored to lie beyond distant hills. Exhausted after several days, he met an elderly shepherd sitting peacefully beneath a lone olive tree. "Is there abundance ahead?" the traveler asked. The shepherd smiled. "There is abundance everywhere." The traveler looked across the barren landscape. "I see only rocks and dust." The shepherd quietly pointed toward a small cluster of green plants growing beside a hidden spring. "I see water." The traveler hurried toward the spring and discovered fresh water flowing beneath the stones. As he drank, he realized something extraordinary. The spring had always been there, only his attention had been elsewhere. This simple story reflects one of the deepest truths about gratitude. It does not invent opportunities. It notices opportunities that anxious minds continually overlook. Ancient cultures understood this remarkably well. In Egypt, harvest festivals were celebrated before counting every grain because gratitude reminded people that prosperity depended upon partnership with forces greater than individual effort. Farmers honored the soil before planting. Families blessed their tables before eating. Craftsmen thanked their teachers before beginning new work. These traditions were not empty ceremonies. They trained perception. When gratitude becomes habitual, The mind gradually shifts from constant deficiency toward existing possibility. Instead of beginning each day asking, "What do I lack?" one begins asking, "What has already been placed in my care?" That single question changes everything. The Stoics practiced a similar discipline. Marcus Aurelius deliberately reflected upon the gifts already present in his life: health, reason, friendship, duty, and the opportunity to improve his character. This practice strengthened resilience because grateful people are less likely to panic when temporary hardship appears. Panic narrows vision, gratitude widens it. Modern psychology quietly confirms what ancient sages observed centuries ago. Attention naturally follows emotional expectation. Individuals consumed by fear often notice threats first. Those practicing appreciation become more likely to recognize resources, supportive relationships, creative ideas, and meaningful opportunities. This is not fantasy, it is perception. Imagine entering a crowded marketplace carrying two different questions. The first asks, "Why is life unfair?" The second asks, "Where might today's opportunity be hiding?" Though nothing in the marketplace changes, your attention follows entirely different paths. Ancient merchants understood this principle intuitively. They developed the habit of appreciating loyal customers, faithful workers, trustworthy partners, and lessons learned from difficult seasons. Gratitude strengthened relationships, and relationships became the foundation of lasting prosperity. One old merchant taught his grandson an unusual lesson every evening. Instead of asking how much money had been earned that day, he asked three different questions. What blessing did you overlook yesterday? What opportunity did gratitude reveal today? What kindness can you multiply tomorrow? The boy eventually inherited his grandfather's business, but more importantly, he inherited his way of seeing. That became the greater fortune. Contentment also performs another quiet miracle. It creates creativity. When the mind escapes constant dissatisfaction, it regains the energy required for thoughtful problem solving. Fear consumes imagination. Gratitude releases it. Many remarkable inventions, successful businesses, and enduring works of art have emerged not from desperate striving, but from calm minds capable of seeing possibilities others ignored. The Taoists described this as flowing with life rather than resisting it. The Hermetic teachers viewed it as raising one's inner state. The Stoics called it governing one's judgments wisely. Different words, the same wisdom. Gratitude does not discourage ambition, it purifies ambition. Instead of pursuing wealth to prove personal worth, one begins creating value because life itself has already become meaningful. Ironically, this healthier relationship with prosperity often produces better decisions, stronger relationships, and more sustainable success. The greatest investors of history frequently displayed remarkable patience. The greatest builders maintained long-term vision. The greatest stewards remained thankful, even during seasons when harvests appeared distant. Gratitude gave them perspective. Perspective strengthened wisdom. Wisdom produced abundance. There will always be reasons to complain. There will always be reasons to worry. Yet there will also always be unnoticed blessings waiting quietly at the edge of awareness. Much like the hidden spring beneath desert stones, the question is not whether abundance exists. The question is whether our vision has been trained to recognize it. Gratitude expands abundance, not because it magically creates wealth overnight, but because it opens the eyes to resources, relationships, ideas, and possibilities that fear continually leaves unseen. An appreciative heart often discovers that prosperity was growing nearby long before it was finally recognized. Chapter 15. Generational Wealth of Character. The oldest civilizations measured wealth differently than many people do today. Gold could be stolen, land could be conquered, kingdoms could disappear within a single generation. Yet there was one inheritance they believed no enemy could easily destroy. A life of character passed faithfully from one generation to the next. Character creates generations. There is an ancient story told about a respected craftsman whose family had prospered for nearly 200 years. Visitors often assumed that the family's success came from hidden treasure buried beneath their estate, or from some secret business technique known only to its members. When the old master felt his life drawing to a close, his children gathered around his bedside expecting instructions about where the family's fortune had been hidden. Instead, he asked them to bring him a small wooden box. Inside the box were no jewels, no gold, no deeds to vast properties. Only a worn notebook whose pages had become yellow with age. His eldest son looked confused. "Father, where is the inheritance?" The old man smiled gently. "You are holding it." The children opened the notebook. Every page contained short lessons collected over decades. Never spend tomorrow's peace for today's pleasure. Keep every promise, even when it becomes expensive. Treat every worker with dignity. Protect your reputation more carefully than your coins. Leave every place better than you found it. The youngest daughter looked disappointed. "But where is the treasure?" The old craftsman answered softly. "Those words created every treasure you have ever seen." After his passing, the family continued following the notebook. Businesses expanded, friendships deepened, opportunities multiplied. Generations later, descendants still preserved those simple teachings, considering them far more valuable than any fortune that could have been divided. The money came and went, the character remained. This forgotten story reflects a principle recognized by countless ancient wisdom traditions. Lasting prosperity is rarely inherited through wealth alone. It is inherited through habits, values, discipline, judgment, and integrity. These invisible qualities quietly shape every visible result. The Book of Proverbs repeatedly praises wisdom as an inheritance more precious than silver or gold. Stoic philosophers similarly taught that virtue remains the only possession completely beyond the reach of fortune. Wealth may disappear through war, recession, illness, or changing markets, but character continues guiding decisions long after external conditions change. This explains why two families can receive identical financial opportunities, yet experience entirely different outcomes over several generations. One inherits money. The other inherits wisdom. Money without wisdom often disappears. Wisdom repeatedly creates value. There is another story about two brothers who inherited equal estates after their father's death. The elder believed his inheritance consisted entirely of land, livestock, and coins. The younger believed his greatest inheritance had been watching their father's daily habits. The elder quickly expanded his spending. The younger quietly expanded his understanding. Years passed. The elder exhausted his fortune trying to impress strangers. The younger gradually built something even larger than what he had received because he copied not merely his father's possessions, but his father's principles. The true inheritance had never been counted in coins. It had been demonstrated every day. Children observe far more carefully than adults often realize. They notice how parents speak about money. They remember whether generosity accompanies success. They absorb habits surrounding work, patience, gratitude, responsibility, and emotional self-control. These silent lessons become invisible seeds planted deeply within future generations. Ancient Egyptian wisdom literature emphasized this repeatedly. A leader's greatest achievement was not merely governing wisely during his own lifetime, but cultivating successors capable of preserving wisdom after his departure. Legacy was measured by continuity of character. The same principle applies within every family. Imagine a child growing up watching parents remain calm during financial hardship instead of surrendering to panic. Imagine that child observing disciplined saving, honest business dealings, generous giving, and thoughtful decision-making. Those experiences become a living education no classroom can fully replace. Character becomes culture. Culture shapes generations. The Stoics also understood that emotional discipline itself becomes inheritance. Marcus Aurelius ruled an empire while constantly reminding himself that power meant little without justice, humility, and self-command. These qualities influenced not only his own decisions, but the example left for those who followed. Prosperity, therefore, extends far beyond personal success. It asks, what values will survive after I am gone? What habits am I teaching without speaking? What example am I leaving behind? Will future generations inherit merely possessions, or will they inherit wisdom capable of creating new prosperity wherever they go? These questions shift financial thinking from temporary accumulation toward lasting contribution. The wealthiest legacy often cannot be stored inside vaults. It lives inside people. Each honest conversation, each thoughtful decision, each disciplined habit, each generous act becomes part of an inheritance continually passed forward. Eventually names fade, buildings change, businesses evolve. Yet noble character quietly continues influencing lives long after its original owner has disappeared. That is genuine prosperity. Character creates generations. Build the inheritance that cannot be stolen. Chapter 16. The Hidden Energy Law of Wealth. If one were to gather the greatest sages of ancient Egypt, the Stoic philosophers of Rome, the Hermetic teachers, the quiet masters of Taoism, and the keepers of timeless wisdom traditions into a single conversation, their languages would differ, their symbols would vary, and their stories would reflect different civilizations. Yet beneath those differences, a remarkable harmony would emerge. Lasting abundance begins with inner order. This is the hidden energy law of wealth, not a secret formula promising effortless riches, not a magical ritual capable of replacing wisdom or disciplined action, rather an integrated way of living in which thought, character, emotion, action, and stewardship cooperate instead of contradicting one another. The Hermetic principle of correspondence reminds us that the outer life continually reflects the quality of countless inner habits. The law of vibration suggests that emotional states influence how we perceive opportunities, solve problems, and relate to others. Cause and effect teaches that every decision plants seeds whose harvest may appear months or years later. The Stoics contribute emotional mastery. The Taoists contribute flow without unnecessary struggle. Ancient wisdom literature contributes stewardship. Gratitude keeps the heart clear. Discipline keeps the path steady. Together they form one philosophy, a philosophy of abundance rooted not in frantic acquisition, but in balanced living. There is an old legend about a traveler searching for the legendary Temple of Prosperity. After decades of wandering through kingdoms, mountains, forests, and deserts, he finally reached an ancient sanctuary hidden among cedar trees. Expecting magnificent treasure chambers, he entered with excitement. Instead, he discovered 7 empty rooms. Confused, he found an elderly keeper quietly sweeping the stone floor. "Where is the treasure?" the traveler asked. The old keeper pointed toward the rooms. "The treasure is assembled there." The traveller looked inside. Each room contained only a single word carved into polished stone: discipline, stewardship, patience, gratitude, integritas, wisdom. The traveller laughed. "I search the world for words," the keeper smiled kindly. "No, you search the world for what those words create." At that moment the traveller understood. The greatest fortunes had always been built from invisible foundations, long before they appeared as visible wealth. Prosperity follows principles. This insight leads naturally to practice, for wisdom that remains merely admired soon fades into memory. The ancients believed truth should become habit. One simple way to embody this philosophy is through a 30-day prosperity practice. Not to manipulate life, but to reshape the mind into faithful stewardship. Begin each morning with gratitude. Before thinking about bills, profits, or financial concerns, identify 3 blessings already entrusted to your care. They may be health, knowledge, relationships, skills, opportunities, or simply another day to create value. Gratitude steadies the heart before the world begins making demands. Practice conscious spending throughout the day. Before every unnecessary purchase, pause briefly and ask a quiet question. Does this strengthen my future or merely satisfy this moment? That single pause gradually transforms impulsive consumption into thoughtful stewardship. Commit yourself to calm decision-making. Financial anxiety often whispers that every choice must be made immediately. Ancient wisdom repeatedly teaches the opposite. Delay emotional decisions whenever possible. Allow clarity to replace urgency. Value patience over panic. Create value consistently. Each day ask how your knowledge, work, kindness, craftsmanship, or service might improve another person's life. Prosperity often follows those who solve meaningful problems with honesty and excellence. In the evening, spend a few quiet minutes reflecting upon the day. Where did fear influence your choices? Where did gratitude guide them? Where were you a faithful steward? Where can tomorrow become wiser? Small reflections create remarkable transformation over time. None of these practices promise instant riches. The ancients rarely trusted shortcuts. They trusted character, like planting an orchard. Today's invisible disciplines become tomorrow's visible harvest. A single seed appears insignificant. Thousands of faithful days eventually create forests. That is how enduring prosperity grows. Not through obsession, not through constant comparison, not through fear, but through steady alignment between what one believes, what one values, and what one consistently does. Money in this ancient understanding becomes more than currency. It becomes a responsibility, a tool, a trust, an opportunity to express wisdom through action. When gratitude softens ambition, when discipline guides freedom, when stewardship replaces waste, when inner peace governs financial choices, abundance ceases to be accidental. It becomes sustainable. This is the hidden energy law of wealth. Not that money itself possesses mystical power, but that a wisely ordered life continually creates conditions in which prosperity can take root, grow with integrity, and bless generations yet to come. Conclusion. There is an old saying among forgotten wisdom schools that the greatest treasures are never hidden beneath mountains or locked inside temples. They are hidden inside truths so simple that most people overlook them. Throughout this journey, we have explored ancient ideas about money, stewardship, gratitude, discipline, and the invisible relationship between inner order and outer prosperity. Yet if all these teachings were reduced to a single sentence, it might simply be this: the way you relate to money reflects the way you relate to yourself. This does not mean that every financial circumstance is the result of personal thinking alone. Life is more complex than that. Economies change, opportunities differ, Hardships arise unexpectedly, and fortune is never distributed equally. The ancient teachers were not blind to these realities. What they understood, however, was that regardless of external conditions, every human being retains influence over something immensely powerful, the quality of their own character, their daily decisions, and the spirit in which they meet life. That is where lasting prosperity begins. The Hermetic philosophers spoke of correspondence, the Stoics spoke of self-command, Taoist sages spoke of flowing with the natural order rather than fighting against it. Ancient wisdom literature praised stewardship, patience, honesty, and diligence. Though these traditions emerged in different places and different centuries, they all quietly pointed toward the same realization. External abundance without internal stability is fragile. Internal stability can create abundance repeatedly. History offers countless examples. Great fortunes have disappeared in a single generation because wisdom failed to accompany wealth. At the same time, people who lost nearly everything often rebuilt their lives because they never lost discipline, integrity, creativity, or hope. The visible fortune had vanished, but the invisible fortune remained intact. That invisible fortune is character. Money amplifies what already exists within us. If fear governs the heart, greater wealth rarely removes fear. It often gives fear more to worry about. If gratitude governs the heart, prosperity becomes easier to manage because it is received with humility rather than obsession. If discipline directs daily life, larger opportunities become easier to handle because the habits required to sustain them already exist. This is why the oldest teachers spent so little time discussing wealth itself and so much time discussing the person seeking wealth. Become worthy of abundance. Become trustworthy with abundance. Become peaceful whether abundance comes quickly or slowly. When these qualities mature, money changes from being a master into becoming a servant. There is another forgotten story that beautifully captures this truth. A young traveler once climbed a high mountain to seek advice from an elderly sage, famous for his wisdom about prosperity. After weeks of difficult climbing, he finally reached the summit. Breathing heavily, he asked the old teacher a single question: "What is the secret of becoming wealthy?" The sage did not answer immediately. Instead, he handed the traveler 2 small bags. One bag was filled with seeds. The other was filled with polished stones. "Plant whichever you believe is more valuable," the sage said. The traveler laughed. "The stones are worth far more." So he buried the stones. The sage quietly planted the seeds. Years later, the traveler returned. The buried stones remained exactly where they had been placed. The seeds had become a thriving orchard, producing fruit for travelers from every direction. The sage smiled gently. Many people mistake stored wealth for living wealth. The lesson reaches far beyond agriculture. Money kept without wisdom often remains stagnant. Money directed by wisdom becomes creative. Knowledge shared multiplies. Kindness multiplies. Integrity multiplies. Generosity multiplies. Skill multiplies. Value multiplies. Like seeds placed into fertile ground, these invisible investments continue producing harvests long after the original effort has been forgotten. This perspective transforms nearly every financial decision. Instead of asking only, "How much can I earn?" one begins asking, "What can I build? Whom can I serve? What habits am I planting? What legacy will these decisions create?" Those questions belong to stewards rather than merely consumers. And stewardship is one of the oldest secrets of enduring abundance. As you leave these pages, you need not remember every story or every philosophical tradition. Ancient wisdom was never intended to become a collection of quotations admired from a distance. It was meant to become a way of living, Wake each morning with gratitude before anxiety has an opportunity to speak. Treat every resource, whether money, time, knowledge, health, or relationships, as something temporarily entrusted to your care. Practice calm when circumstances tempt panic. Practice generosity even when generosity seems inconvenient. Continue learning long after others believe they already know enough. Long patience to replace desperation. Create value before expecting reward. Protect your character more carefully than your possessions. If you faithfully practice these principles, something remarkable begins to happen. Your relationship with money gradually changes. It no longer represents security by itself because your deepest security has become rooted in wisdom. It no longer defines your worth because your worth no longer depends upon comparison. Wealth becomes a tool for meaningful living rather than a substitute for meaning itself. That transformation is perhaps the greatest prosperity of all. For in the end, the richest people are not always those who accumulated the largest fortunes. They are often those who cultivated peaceful minds, generous hearts, disciplined habits, faithful stewardship, and lives that quietly improved the lives of others. Markets will continue rising and falling. Currencies will continue changing. Technology will continue transforming the world. But the invisible principles that have guided thoughtful men and women for thousands of years remain astonishingly constant. Gratitude still creates clarity. Discipline still creates stability. Wisdom still creates opportunity. Integrity still builds trust. Still creates value. Character still outlives wealth. And perhaps that is the greatest secret the ancients hoped future generations would remember. Prosperity is not merely something you possess. It is something you become when your inner life is governed by wisdom, your actions by discipline, your relationships by integrity, and your resources by stewardship. Abundance ceases to be an accident of circumstance. It becomes the natural expression of a life lived with purpose. Guard your character, nurture your wisdom, steward your blessings. The wealth that truly matters will follow.